we're supposed to do. We're supposed to come in and beat up men. And last year, I even went as far as to make a joke. It was not a nice joke, but it was like one of those smart aleck jokes. Remember last year, I said, hey, we got the women's Bible study in the morning, and the women, they gather up, and they pray, and where are the men? And I was being a smart aleck because I knew we didn't have that. Look around right now. Look around. Look at the number of men who are now participating and being active and getting involved. And again, if you're in a seat right now, no problem, man. Next step. Next step. We're going to invite you in today. And if you don't know what that next step is by the end of the sermon, rest on this. The next step might just simply be, come hang with me and we'll pray together. We'll read a verse of Scripture together. It's like that easy. We just want our men to be active and involved and following hard after Jesus. I think it's Psalm 68 in the King James Version of the Bible where it says, I followeth hard after God. And that is really what God asks us to do. To not just follow Him, but to follow hard after God. Man, you can sit. Thank you. Thank you. In 1 year, what a difference. What a difference. Let's take a look at Joshua as our example today. So if you have your Bible, open it up to the Old Testament, and we're going to look at Joshua. And we're going to walk a little bit through his story and see what lessons we might glean from Joshua's story. We'll start in Joshua chapter 1. I'll give you a little bit of background so people have time to turn to Joshua. Many of you know that Moses went to Pharaoh and he said, hey, let my people go. And he had to say it over and over because Pharaoh refused. He would not let the Israelites go. And so God brought these plagues on Egypt. And finally, after the last one, when God said, I'm going to kill every every firstborn, every animal, every child, every firstborn will be killed. And Pharaoh's firstborn was killed because he refused to do what God said was necessary to save his child. At that point, Pharaoh finally said, you know what, take your people and go. Get out, leave. And then he changed his mind. And so as the Israelites were leaving, Pharaoh said, you know what, gather up the army, get the soldiers, and chase after them because I changed my mind. And so, of course, the Israelites are in the wilderness. They're no longer slaves. They are free. And all the while, remember what they did all the while? Oh, they cried and complained and, great, Moses, great idea. Take us out of Egypt. What are we going to eat now? We have no food. God provides manna. Great, Moses, what are we going to do now? We're thirsty and we're in a desert. What are we going to do now in the wilderness? God provides water. Then they come to a sea with the Egyptian army chasing them. Oh, great, Moses, really good idea. Lead us all the way out here. Now we're blocked at the sea, no way around it. They're going to kill us. Good idea, Moses. God opens the sea. The people cross over. And as the Egyptians give chase, God closes the waters. And over and over and over and over, God shows up. And He shows His people that He is faithful and He is good. And all they do is complain. And finally, God says, you know what, I've had enough. I've had enough. And so, not only do you complain all the time, but you even worship other gods. You worship these other gods, and I've had it. I've just had my fill. I am done. And He says, so here's what we're going to do. I once made a promise to your ancestors that you would all have a land flowing with milk and honey. I'm going to honor that promise because I'm God and I keep my promises. But you, this generation of complainers and whiners and idolaters, you will not enter the land. Well, I will forgive you. If you seek forgiveness, I will forgive you, but you will not enter the land. And so for 40 years, the Israelites roamed throughout the wilderness. And finally, as that time comes to a close, Moses sent some scouts across the Jordan River into what we would call the Promised Land. And as the scouts go, they say, they see what's going on, and they come back, and this big group of scouts, they tell Moses, oh, no, we don't want to go in there. Oh, no, I mean, it's going to be dangerous, it's going to be bad, we won't win, let's just stay here. Except for two, Joshua and Caleb. Joshua and Caleb, they come back and they say, listen, Moses, here's what we see. Yeah, it's going to be a challenge, but God is great. God has made a promise and we trust him. Let's go. Gather the men, man. Let's go. Of course, the Israelites don't because they're afraid. I guess God hadn't shown them enough evidence. And so the time has now come where Moses is dying. So here's what we read in Joshua chapter 1. After the death of Moses, the Lord's servant, the Lord spoke to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' assistant. And he said, Moses, my servant, is dead. Therefore, the time has come for you to lead these people, the Israelites, across the Jordan River into the land that I'm giving them. Time for you, Joshua. Rise up. You're the next leader, and you're going to lead these people into the land. And so one of the lessons I wanted to share today, and it's just a very brief point, is that our choices, our behaviors, and our leadership have consequences on our children and future generations. We see it with that group who did not trust God, who worshiped idols. God said, you know what? You're going to wander for 40 years. For 40 years. They could have had that land. They could have had peace. And as God said, a land flowing with milk and honey. They could have had it. But they had to wait 40 years. And the one generation never got to go for their choices. And it meant that the kids had to wait 40 years. And so yes, our choices, our behaviors, and our actions, our leadership has consequences on the next generation. But I said a moment ago, and I want to say it again. Please remember this, that we see here, God keeps his promises. One of the things we learn about God in this passage, God says the time has come, the older generation has passed, it's time for you to go. You're going into the land that I am giving you. I promised it, and I'm delivering. Let's jump ahead to Joshua 3. Joshua 3, chapter 7. In Joshua chapter 2, there's the story of Rahab the prostitute. Some of you know the story. She hides some spies to help the Israelites and says, hey, when you guys attack, please take care of me and my family. And of course, they do. And we get into Joshua 3, and I love this. The Lord told Joshua, today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. They will know that I am with you, just as I was with Moses. A couple of things I really love about that passage. Number one, the Lord told Joshua. I love that. The Lord told Joshua. Joshua regularly interacted with God. They regularly interacted. They had conversations. And I will tell you that I don't know how it went. I don't know if it was an actual voice that boomed from heaven, and perhaps it was. But I suspect God spoke then the way that he typically speaks to us today. And a still small voice, a whisper. Something that Joshua sensed in his spirit. Something that he understood. And this is what God is telling me. And God said, today I will begin to make you a great leader in the eyes of all the Israelites. And they will know that I am with you. And I just thought that as a father, as a husband, as a man, as a pastor, in all of my leadership capacities, I thought, man, wouldn't it be awesome if I trusted and followed God in such a way that he made me a great leader in the eyes of my wife and my children. And you can extend that to my neighbors and co-workers and my church. Wouldn't it be awesome if God did that for me? I guess for you guys it's here. If God said, Rick, today I'm going to begin to make you a great leader in your home, so that your wife and your children will know that I am with you, just like I was with Moses and Joshua and David. And you can keep on going with that line. I think that's awesome. And I think that if I would follow hard after God, he'll do that for me. He will make me a great leader in my home. Not for my greatness, by the way. I've talked about my pride issues. Not for my greatness, not for my glory, but for the good and the welfare of my family. How did we get to Father's Day? You didn't have to petition up here. Oh, okay. I mean, on Father's Day, I would think it would be on a table right up here for me, right? All right, let's continue in Joshua chapter 3. We're going to go to verses 14 through 16. 14 through 16. And so the people left their camp to cross the Jordan, and the priests who were carrying the Ark of the Covenant went ahead of them. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. But as soon as the feet of the priests who were carrying the ark touched the water at the river's edge, the water above that point began backing up a great distance away at a town called Adam, which is near Zarethan. Yeah. And the water below that point flowed onto the Dead Sea until the riverbed was dry. And then all the people crossed over near the town of Jericho. So if you go back just a little bit and you read sometime this week, you'll find out that God had given this exact instruction to Joshua. It's the exact instruction he gave Joshua, and Joshua obeyed. He said, have the priests go with the Ark of the Covenant, which had God's presence. Have the priests go ahead and have them walk into the Jordan River, and I will make a way for you to pass. But we've got to be careful here, because sometimes the details, they escape us. And so what we read was that it was the harvest season. Verse 15. It was the harvest season, and the Jordan was overflowing its banks. Have any of you ever been whitewater rafting? Anybody ever? Have any of you ever been in any sort of water where the current was strong and that water was really powerful? Okay, that was the Jordan. During the flood season, the water would be flowing strong. And so as the Israelites came to the Jordan River, while the Jordan River isn't very big, it was flooded and the waters were flowing hard. There would be white waters. And so the priests, you can imagine, they're carrying the Ark of the Covenant and they come to the bank of the river. And can you imagine the conversation? Because there's a group of priests. Imagine you're the first priest in line holding the Ark of the Covenant. Can you imagine, Joe, what would you do? Yeah, I know, you're like, put me on the spot in church, for real? Well, you're the first priest there. What would you do? And the river's flowing crazy, man. Whitewater rapids, and you can see like tree limbs and stuff floating down the river, and you're carrying this thing, and Joshua says, Joe, jump in. Yeah, of course you would, right? Good answer. Good answer. I'm going to be honest, if it were me, I would be like, hey, didn't I go first yesterday? Isn't it someone else's turn today? Or more likely, here's what I probably would do. I probably, if I'm being honest, I probably would stand at the bank and be like, okay, God, do your thing. I'll wait. Do your thing. That's not what happens. The waters continue to flow until what, church? Until that first priest or group of priests stepped into the water. They stepped in. And when they stepped in, the waters ceased their flow. The waters behind them backed up, and the water in front of them flowed down and out of the way until the riverbed was dry, so that all might pass safely across. And there's a lesson in that for us. There is a lesson in that for us, and that we need to trust God. We need to trust God, and we need to be willing to step in and stand on His promises, because He is a promise keeper. He will deliver what He says He will do. And so sometimes we need to jump in and have that kind of faith. Okay? Go to Joshua 4 now. Joshua 4. So it happened. They stepped right in. That river stopped flowing. And then in Joshua 4, we'll read verses 4 through 7 here. So Joshua called together the 12 men he had chosen, one from each of the tribes of Israel, and he told them, go into the middle of the Jordan in front of the ark of the Lord your God. Each of you must pick up one stone and carry it out on your shoulder, 12 stones in all, one for each of the 12 tribes of Israel. We will use these stones to build a memorial. In the future, your children will ask you, what do these stones mean? And then you can tell them, they remind us that the Jordan River stopped flowing when the Ark of the Lord's covenant went across. Now again, if you backed up just a little and read the previous verses, you would see that yet again, Joshua is following instructions. This is exactly what God told him to do. Pick 12 men, send them into the river, each take a stone, build a memorial. In the Bible we call that an Ebenezer. Okay? And the Hebrew word is masabah. You may think, is he trying to like impress us? Yes, of course I am. Masabah, which means standing stones. The Israelites, they used to erect these standing stones, these tall stone monuments in places where God did incredible, awesome, amazing things, so that they would stand as memorials to future generations. And when people said, what is that stone? Why, that's the time when God stopped the flow of the Jordan so that we could pass by. And what is that stone over there? Well, that's where God did this awesome thing. Joshua followed those instructions exactly. And the Israelites, they took note of what God had done for them, and then they developed these monuments, these Ebenezers, this Masabah. And I want to say this, that we fathers, we should be intentional about honoring God's might and goodness with our families also. And I don't know if for you that means that you should erect a stone monument in your neighborhood or somewhere in your community. Maybe you should, I don't know. It's what the Holy Spirit leads you to do. But I do think there's something wise here for us fathers to be intentional about pausing and sharing with our families. Hey, you know what? Let's stop and reflect. Do you remember the time when God did that great thing for us? And we can talk about the Bible times too, because God did amazing things, but you know what? God's still doing amazing things today. He's still doing amazing things today. Last week I shared with you that Hans' daughter Sarah, she went to Honduras, and that the country had flooded, and for 72 hours nonstop rain. And Hans came in this morning and he said, hey, listen, I got to share something with you. He said, do you know that when we got together before church and we prayed, he said, after church I called Sarah, and she said, Dad, I don't know what happened, but like the rain stopped and the water began to subside. How cool is that? Isn't that cool? And if you understand what that means, that means I have amazing prayer powers. Not at all. Not at all. But it doesn't mean that God's awesome. And God is doing amazing things even in some of our lives. And to have some system whereby we stop and reflect and we remind our wives and our children, hey, do you remember when God did that awesome thing? Do you remember how good God is? Do you remember how awesome and mighty God is? And then this idea of masabah, standing stones, I would also say this. I believe that each one of us, male and female, it doesn't matter, that we are called to be masabah. That we are to be standing stones in our community. That we ought to be some sort of a memorial that people can say, look at the awesome thing God did there. Look at the awesome thing that God did there, because many of you, some of you, I guess, you know my life and where I've come from. And I know some of your stories. Some of you came from ugly places too. And it's not ugly anymore, is it? God has redeemed that. He's made it beautiful. And we are these standing stones that the world can say, look what God has done! Look what God has done! I forget the exact verse in the New Testament. One of you will correct me, I'm sure, in a minute. But there's a verse that says, let your light so shine before men that others may see God's glory in you. Let your light shine before men that others would see you and say, God is great. God is great. Because of what He's done in you. We are to be these standing stones, these masabah. A couple more verses and we'll be done today. Joshua chapter 5. Joshua chapter 5, verses 13 and 14. So Joshua is preparing for the battle. He's getting ready to take his men into the battle. God's given him these crazy instructions. You're going to go into Jericho, this fortified city with these amazing, incomparable walls. You're going to go in and you're going to take that city. And so Joshua is preparing for battle, sharpening weapons, and they're getting everything ready. And God says, here's what you're going to do. You're going to march around the city for 7 days, and you're going to blow a horn. You're going to blow the horn. And on the 7th day, you're going to go around 7 times, and you'll blow the horn, and the walls are going to fall, and the city is yours. Now, that's really not a military strategy that we would probably embrace today, right? I mean, I don't mean to make light of things, but with China on the rise, and North Korea, and whatever's happening in Russia, and of course we have terrorist organizations, most of us are not thinking first, we need a horn. We need a ram's horn. Okay, that's not what we're thinking. And so Joshua, he was like us. He was a human being. There had to be a moment where he was like, really? This is the strategy? This is the plan? And so just before they go into battle, Joshua goes out in the evening for a walk. And in verse 13, he has this encounter. When Joshua was near to the town of Jericho, he looked up and he saw a man standing in front of him with a sword in hand. Joshua went up to him and demanded, "Are you friend or foe?" "Well, neither one," he replied. "I'm the commander of the Lord's army." And at this, Joshua fell to his face on the ground in reverence. "I am at your command," Joshua said. "What do you want your servant to do?" So notice Joshua's courage. He's out for an evening walk and he sees a guy with a sword. And instead of like hiding or spying or retreating and going back home, Joshua approaches the guy and he's like, "Hey, you a friend or an enemy? Which is it?" As the guy has a sword in his hand. That's pretty impressive that Joshua had that kind of courage. But what I love even more is when the man with the sword gives his answer. He says, "Hey, look, I'm neither friend nor foe. I am the commander of the Lord's army." Joshua hits his knees. "I'm in the presence of the living God." And he hits his knees with his face to the ground. What would you have your servant to do? What would you have your servant to do? And for me, that's the message today. That's the message right there of fatherhood. The message of fatherhood is hit your knees, face down, and say, "Lord, what would you have your servant to do?" Because that's what I am. I serve you in different capacities. But one of the primary ways that I serve you is as the leader of my home, as my wife's husband, as my children's father. What is it that you would have me to do? For I am your servant. In Mark chapter 9, verse 35, it won't be on the screen, but Jesus says this. He says, "If anyone desires to lead, he must first be a servant." And he goes on and he says, "Even the Son of Man did not come to lead, but to serve." So men, fathers, is that our attitude? Is that our attitude? I'm your servant. You've placed me in this battlefield. What would you have me to do, Lord? Because I will do it. And as we look at Joshua's story, every single time something happens,